It will come as no surprise for members of the Muskham History Group to discover that there will be no meetings for the foreseeable future. Not too long ago, we had our first foray into YouTube with a program on coronavirus. Treasurer O'Brien tells me this was well received and asked if I could produce some more YouTube programs for the group to keep us together while we're apart. He thought I might reflect the program of talks we will be missing during lockdown. This strikes me as a great idea, so here comes my second YouTube effort, my version of the talk we missed when we were forced to cancel our program. I hope you enjoy Keith's brief history of RAF Syerston. Ooh, that was clever, but unfortunately the soundtrack hasn't improved at all since last time. I promise I will get better as soon as I can, but the last program depressed me so much that I wanted to get something else out as quickly as possible. The coronavirus program reminded us that RAF Syerston is the RAF station just down the A46 from Muskham, and that today it is headquarters of 2nd Flying Training School and the RAF Central Gliding School of the RAF Volunteer Gliding Squadrons, training basic flying skills to RAF Air Cadets. The aerial picture of Syerston that I used in that program shows the type of RAF station that appeared all over the eastern counties during World War II, with 3 crossing concrete runways, taxi and parking bays, and a collection of buildings and hangars. We often forget that early flying machines required little more than a grassy field and some tents. And when the Second World War broke out in 1939, the RAF required bases in a hurry. Grass runways were what they got. So the early RAF stations commissioned during the Second World Conflict looked very little different from those in World War I. Smooth open fields, preferably on the summit of a gentle low hill, mown grass runways, and a scatter of buildings for storing aircraft, housing administration, and for use as workshops. The early emphasis for RAF bases in World War II was in the southeast of England, where firstly they supported the French and then defended against attacks coming into Britain from German aircraft flying from occupied French bases. The priority was bases that have become household names in the history of the Battle of Britain: Tangmere, Lymph, Manston, Westmelling, Biggin Hill, Kenley, and all the rest. But since the end of World War I, the newly born RAF was building up its main offensive weapon in Bomber Command, the aircraft that Lord Trenchard had called the Bloody Paralysers. The importance of the bomber and its ability to hit back at any aggressor was underlined in 1933 when the then de facto Prime Minister Stanley Baldwin said, "The bomber will always get through." Whilst South East England bases were best positioned for actions coming from and going into France, when the emphasis was switched to bombing targets in northern Germany, the stations in Lincolnshire and East Anglia became more important. For the rest of the war, and on into the Cold War, the East Coast counties became the homes of Bomber Command, and Lincolnshire earned the deserved sobriquet of Bomber County. As Lincolnshire filled up, new bases spilled into Nottinghamshire and South Yorkshire. Eventually, bomber command bases and those which were lent to the United States Army Air Force spread all the way down the northeast England counties. And on December the 1st, 1940, one of these new commissioned bomber command bases was RAF Syerston, described as in the parish of the village of Flintham near Newark-on-Trent. It was opened as a fairly typical airfield with grass runways and taxiways and buildings for administration, stores, workshops and accommodation spread around the station. The first squadron deployed on the station was 304 Land of Silesia Polish Squadron of the RAF. Most of the flyers who have formed 304 Squadron in August 1940 have been flying with the Polish bomber squadrons, mostly flying the LSW-6 Zubra medium bomber. Twin-engined medium bomber? That sounds like a Wellington. So the Air Ministry equipped 304 Squadron with Vickers Wellington bombers. In fact, the Vickers Wellington was a far superior aircraft compared to the almost obsolete LWS-6, so 304 Polish Squadron flying Vickers Wellingtons made RAF Syerston operational. And in April 1941, 304 Squadron was joined by 305 RAF Polish Squadron, Land of Greater Poland, with their Polish Hussar wing symbol in their insignia, also flying Wellingtons. Unfortunately, in 1940, the bomber didn't always get through. A report by a civil servant, known as the Butt Report, found that only 1 in every 3 bombs dropped on enemy territory actually landed within 5 miles of the target. When aircraft were bombing in the which was where German war industries were concentrated, the ratio got even worse. Here, only 1 in every 10 bombs dropped fell within 5 miles of the target, and it was so bad that some bombs were dropped on worthwhile targets that weren't even scheduled, but they didn't count. This performance was less to do with the bomb aimers of the time being cross-eyed, four-legged goats with bent sights, as the popular opinion of the Royal Air Force would have it, and it was much more to do with the problems of navigation when flying over a cloud-covered country and relying on map reading, observation, and the mathematics of dead reckoning. The fact that those nasty German fighter pilots of the Luftwaffe could shoot down medium bombers in droves during daylight didn't help either. This led to the entire thing having to be done at night. Most bombers flying over Germany in 1940 were simply lost and bombed targets of opportunity, which was sometimes the North Sea. Well, better to hit a target than simply jettisoning your bombs. Bombing coastal targets was much more reliable, as you simply found the coast and flew along it until you reached your target and bombed it. Polish bomber crews became skillful with regular nighttime bombing of targets on the German Baltic coast. Presumably, RAF planners felt that Poland, having a Baltic coastline, somehow gave the Polish air crews an advantage. In July 1941, RAF Bomber Command shuffled the pack and the poles were moved out to make way for 408 Squadron of the Royal Canadian Air Force, known as the Goose Squadron. The Goose Squadron were flying the Handley Page Hampden. Classified as a medium bomber, it was one of a trio of bombers, the Hampden, the Wellington that we've already mentioned, and the Whitley, that formed the backbone of Bomber Command until late 1940. The distinctive narrow and deep fuselage of the Handley Page Hampden gave them the nickname Flying Suitcase, but crews liked them and pilots enjoyed the almost fighter-like views of the cockpit and the two forward-firing fixed machine guns. At least, they liked them until the fighting started. Two Bristol Pegasus engines of 1,000 horsepower each took the crew of 4, consisting of pilot, navigator and bomb aimer, radio operator and dorsal gunner, and a ventral gunner, and a bomb load of around 4,000 pounds, to a height of around 19,000 feet. But the trend is towards bigger bomb loads and bigger airplanes. And with ever heavier bomb loads being carried by increasingly heavy bombers, it became obvious that the days of the grass strip airfield were limited. Even taxiing heavily laden aircraft around the airfield could become hazardous in the rainy season. So from December 1941 until May 1942, RAF Syerston was closed down for a complete overhaul. It was recommissioned on the 5th of May 1942 with the classic 3 concrete runway triangle, a concrete perimeter track with keyhole standings, and 2 T2 type hangars, capable of handling the RAF's latest heavy bomber type, the Averell Lancaster. The Averell Lancaster was the most important, most effective, most efficient, and generally best bomber flown by Bomber Command until the Averell Vulcan. In came 61 Squadron with their Lancasters to form part of RAF 5 Group Bomber Command, headquartered at St. Vincent Hall, Grantham. Originally, Avro had produced a 2-engine heavy bomber designed by Roy Chadwick and called the Manchester after Avro's home base. On paper, the Manchester was better than any other RAF bomber of the time, but unfortunately it was powered by the Rolls-Royce Vulture engine, which was probably the worst aero engine Rolls-Royce have ever made. It turned out that more than half the Manchester casualties came from aircraft failures rather than operational failures, with aircraft being shot down in enemy action, and 1/3 of those casualties came directly from Vulture engine failures. Needless to say, the crews were not enthusiastic to fly in this bomber, but they agreed it was a beautifully designed and laid out aircraft. Initially, the idea was to fit 2 Rolls-Royce Merlin engines, but Chadwick preferred to redesign the wing plan around 4 Merlin engines to meet the Air Ministry specification for 4-engine bombers that brought the short Stirling and the Handley Page Halifax into service. And so the legend is born. The Lancaster was powered by 4 Rolls-Royce Merlin 20 V12 piston engines. It had a crew of 7: pilot, flight engineer, navigator, bomb aimer and nose gunner, wireless operator, mid-upper gunner, and rear gunner. In its standard configuration, it could already carry 14,000 pounds of bombs, but it could be modified to carry the 10-ton Grand Slam earthquake bomb later in the war. It's a beautiful aircraft. 61 Squadron brought its Lancasters into Syerston in 1942, and in November 1943, 61 Squadron won its first and only Victoria Cross. William Reid was born in Syerston, Scotland in 1921, the son of a blacksmith. After a higher grade school education, he studied metallurgy, then joined the RAF and was quickly promoted to sergeant. He went for flying training to Canada and received his wings in June 1942. He was promoted to pilot officer and posted to Little Rissington, flying airspeed Oxfords. He moved to the operational training unit at RAF North Luffenham, where he was flying instructor on Vickers Wellingtons. December 1942 saw him promoted to flying officer, and in September 1943 he was transferred to 61 Squadron with its Lancasters at RAF Syerston. On the 3rd of November 1943, 61 Squadron was tasked to bomb Dusseldorf in Germany. 21-year-old Bill Reid was piloting Lancaster serial LM360. Shortly after they crossed the Dutch coast, they were attacked by a Messerschmitt 110 night fighter. It knocked out the power to the gun turrets and riddled the cockpit area, wounding Reid and his flight engineer several times. He established that his flight engineer could continue and said nothing about his own wounds and carried on to the target. Nearer the target area, flying closer to the target, they were hit again, this time by a Focke-Wulf 190 flying Ville de Sau. The Ville de Sau missions allowed daylight fighters to join the nighttime bomber stream and look for targets of opportunity illuminated either by searchlight or moonglow and go in and attack them. This time the damage was far more serious. The navigator was killed and the RT operator was seriously wounded. Both Reid and the flight engineer were wounded again, and the whole of the starboard tailplane fell off the aircraft. LM360 was still flying, however, and Bill and his remaining crew decided to carry on and bomb the target even in a crippled and badly damaged Lanc. This they did, and despite almost passing out from lack of blood and with much struggle, Reid also managed to bring the crippled aircraft back towards Syerston. But when they crossed the English coast and he saw the lights of RAF Shipton and a USAF base in East Anglia, he landed. The undercarriage of the Lancaster collapsed on landing, but most of them were back on terra firma, hopefully safe. Unfortunately, the RT operator died shortly after landing, but both Reid and his flight engineer recovered from their wounds after a spell in hospital, and on the 14th of December 1943 he was awarded the Victoria Cross for tenacity and devotion to duty beyond praise by continuing to attack a target in a badly damaged aircraft while seriously wounded. When asked why he did not simply return after the attack from the 110 over the Dutch coast, he replied with one of those laconic answers which were typical of RAF crews of the time. He said that he thought turning around and flying back against the bomber stream might be dangerous. In January 1944, he joined 617 Dambuster Squadron at Woodall Spa. He was flying a tall boy bombing operation against a V2 weapon store. He had released his bomb when his Lancaster was hit by a bomb dropped from another Lancaster aircraft flying above him. This time the Lancaster was going down and in flames, but he managed to hold it while the crew escaped. Then he got out of the cockpit escape hatch, something which was very rarely done, but he managed it with only a broken arm. He was taken prisoner and finished the war a POW. His VC was sold after his death for a UK record price of £384,000. On the 17th of November 1943, just 2 weeks after Flight Lieutenant Reed's VC flight, RAF Syerston became non-operational as a bomber station and became the Lancaster Finishing School. The unit boasted some elderly Wellington bombers, some Hurricane fighters, and some Spitfires left over from the Battle of Britain. It even had a couple of Miles Martinet target tows. The idea being to put the finishing touches to bomb aimers and air gunners before they joined their RAF Lancaster squadrons. Throughout its operational life, Syerston had been the home of squadrons for 5 Bomber Group of Bomber Command. This group also had 617 Dambuster and Pathfinder Squadron and 9 Squadron famous for their precision bombing. Many of the technical innovations in navigation, bombing, aircraft defence and electronic countermeasures were introduced by 5 Group and operated in Lancasters flying from Syerston. So by the end of the war, the performance of finding and hitting a target went up significantly. The bomber was always likely to get through, but flying had ceased to be an art and bombing had become a science. Then on the 1st of April 1945, the Lancaster Finishing School left and RAF Syerston became fully operational again when on the 22nd of April, 49 Squadron moved in with its Lancasters. But the war was almost over and 49 Squadron only flew one wartime operation on the 27th of April to bomb Hitler's mountain retreat at Berchtesgaden. And later after the war, 49 Squadron participated in Operation Exodus, bringing POWs home from Europe. 49 Squadron stayed at Syerston for 1 month only after the war, and on the 25th of October 1945 the station joined Transport Command with 1331 Heavy Transport Conversion Unit converting pilots onto Avro York transports. Many of these pilots went on to the Berlin Airlift, and some were future airline pilots with British Overseas Airways Corporation and British European Airways. The war is over, but the peace still needs to be secured. January 1948 saw Syerston being taken over by Flying Training Command, and on the 1st of February 22 Group Flying Training School came in to train Fleet Air Arm pilots flying Harvard 2Cs. These pilots also use nearby RAF Newton, RAF Wimswold and RAF Tollerton to practice their circuits and bumps. In 1955, Syerston became No. 2 Flying Training School, RAF, flying Percival Provosts, and in 1959 converted to the Hunting Percival Jet Provost, which was the main jet trainer before the fallen Gnat and the BAC Hawk, which is still flying with the red arrows. On September 1958, Syerston had another visit to the nation's headlines, when an Averell Vulcan doing engine trials with a Rolls-Royce test pilot at the controls was scheduled to overfly a Battle of Britain commemorative air display at Syerston. The Vulcan flew down the centre line of the runway and banked away when the forward edge of the starboard wing began to collapse. The pilot declared an emergency and pulled into the circuit hoping to land. Unfortunately, on final approach, the wing folded, and with fuel cascading over the hot engines, the Vulcan burst into flames and crashed into a control caravan at the end of the runway, killing all the crew and 3 of the 4 controllers in the caravan. The whole event was caught on film by a BBC camera crew who were recording the meeting for the BBC News. Sad though it is, the crash site is soon cleared up, and the training in the Jet Provost with Flying Training School continues. Activity at the school declined and increased as the need for RAF pilots fell and rose during the Cold War. But No. 2 Flying Training School stayed at Syerston even when not training pilots. So Syerston continued as headquarters of No. 2 Flying Training School as it is today. In January 1975, RAF Syerston also became the base for the RAF Central Gliding School, with various winch-towed gliders for air cadets. The picture shows a museum piece, but I actually flew in this type of glider when I was a member of the Air Training Corps. Syerston also includes with its gliders the Viking T Mark I, which is still stationed there, along with a power glider to start basic flying training for Air Cadet trainee pilots with 644 Volunteer Glider Squadron. In 2018, RAF Syerston counted down to the RAF Centenary. Since January 2014, it has been the home of 2nd Flying Training School headquarters, the RAF Central Gliding School, and 644 Volunteer Gliding Squadron. The Central Flying School also maintains an examining unit for gliding examiners at the station. This means it is a vital base for Air Cadet members of the various cadet squadrons of the Air Training Corps and the Air Branch of the Combined Cadet Force, with the new Air Cadet Gliding Academy situated on the base. In 2018, as part of the centenary celebrations, the RAF appointed its first ever female Honorary Ambassador of Air Cadets. Can you guess who it is? Countdown is a clue. Yes, it's Group Captain Carol Vorderman. Besides being a fairly competent mathematician, Carol is also a qualified engineer and has held a private pilot's license for some time. She has 2 daughters, both of whom were Air Cadets when younger, and her eldest daughter is still an officer in the Volunteer Training Reserve. Carol Vorderman is now a regular visitor to RAF Syerston, where she recently inaugurated the £15 million Air Cadet Gliding Academy. RAF Syerston opened 1940 and still going strong. I hope you've enjoyed this program about the history of RAF Syerston. If you have enjoyed it, please let Brian know. Next on the plan is Keith's version of local Victoria Cross war heroes. I hope you're interested in that subject also. And remember, stay safe until we can all meet again. Thank you for watching, hoping we see you soon.